Richard Blackwood woke up at exactly 5:30 a.m., just like he had every morning for the past 15 years. His alarm didn't even need to ring anymore. His body had become a machine, programmed to perfection. He rolled out of his king-sized bed. The silk sheets barely wrinkled from his restless sleep. The first thing he saw wasn't the sunrise painting, the New York skyline in golden hues. It wasn't the beautiful view from his penthouse windows that people would kill for. No, the first thing Richard saw was his phone, buzzing with notifications from 3 different time zones. Stock prices from Tokyo, emails from London, and missed calls from Los Angeles. He walked to his bathroom, still scrolling through messages. The marble floors were cold under his bare feet, but he didn't notice. He'd stopped noticing small things. Like that years ago? His reflection stared back at him from the mirror, and for a split second he paused. Gray hair at his temples, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 5 years ago, and something else. Something missing from his eyes that he couldn't quite name, but the moment passed quickly. Another notification buzzed, and Richard was back in his world of numbers and deals. By 6 a.m., he was dressed in his usual armor, a perfectly tailored navy suit that cost more than most people made in 3 months. His tie was silk, imported from Italy. His shoes were handmade leather from London. Everything about him screamed success, power, money. Yet, as he walked through his penthouse, adjusting his cufflinks, he felt like he was wearing a costume. The penthouse itself was a masterpiece. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view that real estate agents called breathtaking. The furniture was chosen by an interior designer who charged more per hour than most people made in a week. Every piece had a story, a pedigree, a price tag. That would make ordinary people dizzy, but Richard walked through it all like a ghost in his own home. He stopped at the kitchen, where his personal chef had already prepared his breakfast. The same breakfast he'd eaten for 3 years straight: egg whites, avocado toast on gluten-free bread, and black coffee from beans that cost $60 a pound. He ate mechanically, reading reports on his tablet, not tasting a single bite. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood," his assistant called through the intercom. "Your car will be ready in 10 minutes. Your first meeting has been moved to 8:30, and the Tokyo call is confirmed for 2 p.m. "Fine," Richard replied, not looking up from his screen. As he walked toward the door, something caught his eye. In the corner of his living room sat a magnificent grand piano, a Steinway & Sons, worth more than most people's houses. It was black as midnight, polished to perfection and completely untouched. Richard had bought it 3 years ago. Not because he played piano, he didn't. Not because he loved music, he rarely listened to any. He'd bought it because his decorator said it would make a statement, and it did make a statement, all right. It said, "I have so much money I can buy expensive things I'll never use." The piano bench was pristine. No sheet music sat on the music stand. The keys were covered with a cloth to keep dust away. It was probably the most expensive piece of furniture in New York. That had never been used for its actual purpose. Richard stared at it for a moment, then shook his head and headed for the elevator. The ride down 40 floors gave him just enough time to check his stock portfolio. Up 3% from yesterday. Good, but not great. Nothing was ever great anymore. When you have everything, even winning feels empty. His driver was waiting with the usual smile. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood. Beautiful day, isn't it?" Richard grunted in response, already back on his phone. He didn't notice that it really was a beautiful day. The kind of October morning in New York when the air is crisp and the leaves are starting to turn colors that make tourists stop and take pictures. At his office, Richard moved through his day like a shark through water. Meeting after meeting, call after call, deal after deal. He was good at what he did. No, he was brilliant at it. He could spot a good investment from across a room and negotiate deals that would make other businessmen weep with envy. But somewhere around noon, sitting in his corner office with its view of Central Park, Richard felt something strange, a heaviness in his chest, a tiredness that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. His assistant knocked and entered. "Mr. Blackwood, you seem stressed lately. Maybe you should take a vacation or pick up a hobby. Something to help you relax." Richard looked up from his computer screen. A hobby? The word came out like he was tasting something sour. Yes, sir. Something fun. Something that makes you happy. Like, I don't know. Maybe you could learn to play that beautiful piano you have? And that's when Richard said it. The words that would change everything, though he didn't know it yet. Play the piano? I want to laugh. His voice was cold, dismissive. Happiness isn't something you play, Johnson. It's something you buy. And I've bought plenty of it. His assistant nodded and left quietly, but Richard could see something in her eyes. Pity, maybe. Or sadness. He didn't like either option. The rest of the day dragged. More calls, more emails, more decisions that affected hundreds of people he'd never meet. By evening, Richard was back in his penthouse, alone again. He ordered dinner from his usual restaurant. The same meal he'd ordered twice a week for 2 years. He ate it while reading financial reports, sitting at a dining table that could seat 12 people, but had only ever seated one, after dinner. He poured himself a glass of whiskey that cost more per bottle than most people spent on groceries. In a month. He stood by his windows, looking out at the city lights and felt nothing. This was his life. This was what he'd worked so hard to achieve. A penthouse in the sky, money in amounts that would make him comfortable for several lifetimes. Power. That could move markets and change lives. So why did he feel so empty? The piano sat in the corner, silent and accusatory. Richard walked over to it and lifted the cloth from the keys. They were perfect, of course. Not a scratch or mark on them. He pressed one key, just one. The note rang out clear and pure in the silence of his apartment, but instead of beauty, all Richard heard was the sound of waste, the sound of something magnificent being ignored, the sound of potential that would never be realized. He covered the keys again and went to bed, not knowing that in just a few days everything would change, not knowing that the woman who cleaned his penthouse had been listening to his footsteps every day, understanding things about him that he didn't even understand about himself. Tomorrow would be another day just like today? Or so Richard thought. Maria Santos arrived at the Blackwood penthouse every Tuesday and Friday at exactly 8 a.m. She had been doing this for 3 months now, and she knew the routine by heart. Ring the service elevator, show her ID to the doorman, ride up 40 floors, and enter a world that felt like stepping into a museum, but unlike a museum, this place was lived in. Sort of. Maria had cleaned many homes in her 5 years in New York, but none quite like this one. Most wealthy people's homes told stories. Family photos on the mantel, children's drawings stuck to expensive refrigerators, books with worn pages that someone actually read. This place was different. It was perfect, sterile, and somehow very sad. She let herself in with the key Richard's assistant had given her. The first thing she always noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind of quiet you get in a library or a church. This was the heavy, empty quiet of a place where no one really lived. Even though someone slept there every night. Maria set down her cleaning supplies and walked through the apartment, opening curtains and windows. She had learned that Richard left early and came home late, so she had the place to herself most days. It gave her time to really see things. The kitchen was spotless because it was barely used. The same plate, the same cup, the same fork sat in the dishwasher every time she came. Richard ate the same breakfast every day, she could tell. The takeout containers in the trash were always from the same 3 restaurants. Italian on Mondays, Japanese on Wednesdays, American on Fridays. Like clockwork. As she cleaned, Maria often found herself humming. It was a habit from her old life, back in Guatemala, where music filled every corner of her world. She had been a music teacher there for 15 years. Her small apartment near the school had been cramped and simple, but it had been alive with sound. Students practicing scales, neighbors singing, children laughing in the streets. Here, in this palace in the sky, there was no music at all. Well, except for the piano. The first time Maria saw it, she had to stop and catch her breath. It was magnificent. A Steinway grand piano that must have cost more than she would make in 10 years. She had approached it carefully, like approaching a sleeping giant, But when she lifted the cloth from the keys, her heart broke a little. No. Fingerprints on the keys, no sheet music, no bench worn smooth from years of use. This beautiful instrument was nothing more than expensive decoration. Maria knew pianos. She had learned to play on an old upright piano at her school in Guatemala. The keys stuck sometimes, and it was always slightly out of tune, but it had soul. It had been played by thousands of children over the years, and you could feel their joy in every note. This piano had never known joy. It had never known anything. She began to dust it carefully, running her cloth over the smooth black surface. Without thinking, she pressed one key. Just one. The sound that came out was perfect, rich, and beautiful. It rang through the apartment. Like a bell, breaking the endless silence, Maria looked around quickly, afraid she had done something wrong. But Richard was at work, as always. She was alone with this sleeping beauty of an instrument. She pressed another key, then another. Before she knew it, she was playing a simple melody. Nothing fancy, just a children's song she used to teach her students back home. Her fingers remembered the notes even though she hadn't played in months. The music filled the empty apartment, bouncing off the expensive walls and dancing through the rooms. For a moment the place felt alive. Maria stopped abruptly, realizing what she was doing. This wasn't her piano. This wasn't her home. She was here to clean, not to play music. She covered the keys again and went back to her work, but something had changed. The apartment didn't feel quite so sad anymore over the weeks. Maria began to notice things about Richard that others probably missed. She could tell he didn't sleep well because his bed was always a mess, sheets twisted like he'd been fighting with them all night. She could tell he was stressed because there were always antacid tablets by his bathroom sink. She noticed he got a lot of phone calls but no personal visits. The guest bedroom was perfect because no guests ever came. The dining room table was set for one because he always ate alone. Most of all, she noticed that he walked past the piano every single day and never looked at it. Not once. Maria had grown up poor, but she had grown up rich in other ways. Her house had been full of laughter, music, and people who cared about each other. Her students had called her Maestra Maria and would run to hug her when she walked into the classroom. Her husband, before he died, would sing to her while she cooked dinner. Richard had everything she had ever dreamed of having, and nothing she couldn't live without. Sometimes when she was dusting his office, she would hear him on phone calls. His voice was always cold, businesslike. He talked about millions of dollars like other people talked about pocket change, but she never heard him laugh. She never heard him say anything kind to anyone. One day, while she was cleaning his bedroom, Maria found something that made her heart hurt. In his knitstand drawer, mixed in with expensive watches and gold pens, was a small faded photograph. It showed a much younger Richard with an older couple who must have been his parents. They were all smiling, standing in front of a small house with a white picket fence. The young Richard in the photo looked happy, really happy. His eyes were bright and full of life. Maria compared it to the man she occasionally saw leaving in the mornings, and it was like looking at two different people. What happened to that happy young man? Where did he go? Maria carefully put the photo back where she found it, but she couldn't stop thinking about it. Everyone had a story. Everyone had reasons for becoming who they were. Even cold, distant Richard Blackwood had once been someone's son, someone who smiled for family photos. That afternoon, while she was vacuuming the living room, Maria found herself humming again. This time, it was a song her grandmother used to sing to her. A song about how music could heal broken hearts and bring light to dark places. She didn't know that Richard had come home early that day. She didn't know he was standing in the hallway, listening. She didn't know that her simple, sweet humming was the first music that apartment had heard in 3 years. She didn't know that for just a moment. Richard closed his eyes and remembered what it felt like to hear his mother humming in their old kitchen. Back when their house was small but full of love, Maria finished her work and left. As always, leaving behind an apartment that was clean and perfect and empty. But this time, something invisible had been left behind too. A tiny crack in the wall Richard had built around his heart. A crack just big enough for music to slip through. Tomorrow would bring another day of silence, another day of loneliness. Another day of Richard walking past the piano without seeing it, but change was coming whether he knew it or not. It was coming in the form of a quiet woman who understood that some things were more valuable than money. Some things, like music, like kindness, like the courage to really see another person, couldn't be bought at any price. Richard's day had started badly and gotten worse with each passing hour. The phone call that changed everything came at 10:47 a.m., right in the middle of his morning coffee. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm afraid I have some difficult news." The voice on the other end belonged to his biggest client, a man whose company had been working with Richard's firm for over 5 years. "We've decided to go with another investment firm. This partnership is over." Richard felt his stomach drop. This wasn't just any client, this was the client. The one that brought in 30% of his company's revenue. The one that had trusted him with hundreds of millions of dollars. The one that had just walked away without warning. "Can I ask why?" Richard managed to say, though his voice sounded strange to his own ears. "Honestly, you've become too focused on numbers and not enough on people. Your team feels like machines, not humans. We need partners who understand that business is about relationships, not just profit margins." The line went dead. Richard stared at his phone for a long moment, then slammed it down on his desk. His assistant knocked and peered in, probably hearing the noise. "Not now," Richard snapped before she could say anything. The rest of the morning was a blur of damage control. Emergency meetings with his team, frantic calls to other clients to make sure they weren't thinking of leaving too, and a very uncomfortable conversation with his business partners about what this loss meant for the company. By lunchtime, Richard had a pounding headache and the kind of anger that made his hands shake. He tried to eat but couldn't taste anything. He tried to focus on other work but kept thinking about what his former client had said. Too focused on numbers, not enough on people. What did that even mean? Business was about numbers. Profit and loss, risk and reward, buy and sell. People were just the pieces that made it all work. Richard left the office early, something he never did. He just couldn't stand being there anymore, answering questions about what went wrong, pretending he had everything under control when he felt like his whole world was falling apart. When he got home, he was surprised to see cleaning supplies in the hallway. It was Friday, which meant Maria was there. Usually he was careful to come home after she left. He preferred not to see the people who worked for him unless he had to. It kept things simple, but today nothing was simple. Richard walked into his apartment and immediately saw Maria in his office, carefully organizing papers on his desk. She had moved things around to clean properly, which was exactly what she was supposed to do. But in his current state of mind, it felt like another person messing with his carefully controlled world. "What are you doing?" His voice came out sharper than he intended. Maria looked up, startled. "I'm cleaning your office, Mr. Blackwood, just like every Friday." "You moved my papers." Richard walked over to his desk, his anger from the day finding a new target. "These were in a specific order. I had them exactly where I needed them. I'm sorry, sir, I was very careful. I put everything back exactly where it was." But Richard wasn't listening. He was seeing red the way he used to when he was a kid, and something pushed him too far. All the frustration from losing his biggest client, all the stress from years of working too hard and sleeping too little, all the loneliness he pretended didn't exist, came pouring out. "You don't understand," he said, his voice getting louder. "You people never understand? You think you can just move things around, mess with other people's lives, and it doesn't matter? But it does matter. Every single thing in this apartment costs more than you make in a year, and you treat it all like it's nothing." Maria stood very still, her hands folded in front of her. She had been yelled at before by other employers, by people who thought having money gave them the right to be cruel. But something about the way Richard was looking at her made her feel sad instead of angry. "I understand you're upset, Mr. Blackwood. But I was just doing my job." "Your job?" Richard laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Your job is to clean and stay out of my way. Your job is to be invisible. I don't pay you to understand anything." He started pacing around the room, his expensive shoes clicking on the hardwood floor. You know what I told someone today? I said, play the piano, I want to laugh. Because that's what happiness is to people like you, isn't it? Just play some music and everything will be fine. Just sing a little song and all your problems disappear. Richard stopped pacing and looked directly at Maria. But people like you wouldn't understand what real problems feel like. You wouldn't understand what it's like to have people depending on you, to have millions of dollars at stake, to make decisions that affect hundreds of jobs. You just clean and hum your little songs and go home to your simple little life. The words hung in the air like poison. Richard immediately felt a sick feeling in his stomach, like he'd eaten something rotten. He'd gone too far, and he knew it. But he couldn't seem to stop himself. You think having money makes everything easy. But it doesn't. It makes everything harder. Everyone wants something from you. Everyone is watching, waiting for you to fail. And when you do fail, when you lose everything you've worked for, people like you just shrug and say, play some music, you'll feel better. Maria had been listening quietly, but now she stopped what she was doing. She put down her cleaning cloth and looked at Richard with eyes that seemed to see right through him. Senator Blackwood, she said, her voice quiet but steady. I have played piano since I was 7 years old. Richard stopped pacing. What? I taught music to children for 15 years in my country. I had students who came to class with holes in their shoes and empty stomachs, but they would light up when they heard music. They would forget about being hungry, forget about being poor, forget about all the things they didn't have, because music gave them something money cannot buy. She took a step closer to him, and Richard found himself backing up slightly. You have a concert piano in your living room that costs more than I will make in my entire life. But it sits there silent, day after day, collecting dust like an expensive piece of furniture. You walk past it every morning and every night, and you never even see it. Maria's voice was getting stronger now, more confident. You speak of laughter as if it's another thing to purchase at the store. You talk about happiness like it's a business deal you can negotiate. But Senator Blackwood, I have something to tell you. She paused, and Richard found himself holding his breath. I have very little money. I clean houses to survive. I send most of what I earn to my family back home. I live in a small apartment with 3 other women, and I have not bought new clothes in 2 years. But you know what? I am not the one who is poor in this room. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard felt like he'd been slapped. No one had ever spoken to him like this. No one had ever looked at him with such a mixture of pity and understanding. Perhaps the problem, Maria continued, is not what you lack, but what you have forgotten how to see. You have forgotten that music exists not to be owned, but to be felt. You have forgotten that joy is not bought, but created. You have forgotten that the most valuable things in life cost nothing at all. Richard stood there, speechless, while Maria calmly picked up her cloth and continued cleaning. The confrontation was over, but its effects were just beginning. Richard couldn't sleep that night. He lay in his expensive bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Maria's words over and over in his mind. No one had ever spoken to him like that. No one had ever looked at him with such clear eyes and told him truths he didn't want to hear. He had been called many things in his life: ruthless, brilliant, cold, successful, but no one had ever called him poor. The words stuck in his throat like a piece of glass dot by morning. Richard's anger had faded into something else. Curiosity, maybe, or confusion. He couldn't stop thinking about what Maria had said about the piano, about music giving people something money couldn't buy. It sounded impossible to him, but the way she had said it, with such certainty, made him wonder. He found himself walking to the piano before he left for work, really looking at it for the first time in months. It was beautiful. He had to admit, the wood was so perfectly polished he could see his reflection in it. The keys were pristine white and black, arranged in perfect order, but what was he supposed to do with it? How could pressing these keys possibly solve any of his real problems? Richard shook his head and left for work, but the questions followed. Him all day, office, he tried to focus on saving his business. The loss of his biggest client was serious, but not fatal. He had other clients, other deals in the works. He could rebuild. He was good at rebuilding, but every time he was in a meeting, he found his mind wandering. He would catch himself remembering the sound of Maria humming while she cleaned. He had heard her a few times, though he'd never said anything about it. Her voice had been soft, almost like a whisper, but there had been something in it that made him pause whatever he was doing to listen. What was it about music that made people act like it was magic? By the time Richard got home that evening, he had made a decision. He was going to settle this once and for all. If Maria thought music was so powerful, so life-changing, then she could prove it. And when she couldn't, when she realized that pressing piano keys couldn't solve real problems or bring back lost clients or make loneliness disappear, maybe they could both move on. Maria was just finishing up when he walked in. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, and Richard could see a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She probably expected him to fire her after yesterday's confrontation. "Maria," he said, his voice calmer than it had been the day before, "I want to talk to you." She set down her cleaning supplies and faced him, her hands clasped in front of her. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood? Yesterday, you said you were a piano teacher? You said music could give people something money can't buy." Richard walked over to the piano and put his hand on its smooth surface. "I don't believe you." Maria raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. "So here's what I'm proposing," Richard continued. "You say music is so powerful? Prove it. I'm challenging you to show me what you claim this piano can do." "What do you mean?" Richard turned to face her fully. "Play for me. Show me this magic you talk about. If music really can do what you say it can do, then prove it." Maria was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. "You're mocking me." "No," Richard said, and he was surprised to realize he meant it. "I'm not mocking you. I'm genuinely curious. You seemed so certain yesterday, so sure that music was the answer to everything. Well, here's your chance to prove it. And if I can't prove it to your satisfaction?" Richard shrugged. "Then we'll both know you were wrong." Maria walked over to the piano and lifted the cloth from the keys. She ran her fingers over them gently, like she was greeting an old friend. "And if I can prove it, then ... Richard paused. He hadn't thought that far ahead. "Then I'll admit I was wrong." "That's not enough," Maria said quietly. "If I'm going to do this, if I'm going to try to show you something you've spent years convincing yourself doesn't exist, then you have to give me something in return." "What do you want?" "More money?" Maria looked at him with those clear eyes again. "I want your attention, real attention. Not the kind where you're checking your phone or thinking about work or planning your next meeting. I want you to sit and listen, really listen. For how long?" 1 week. "Every evening when you come home, I'll play for you for 30 minutes, but you have to be present. No distractions. No technology, just you and the music." Richard felt a familiar urge to negotiate, to find a way to get what he wanted without giving up too much in return. But something about the way Maria was looking at him made him stop. "Fine," he said. 1 week. 30 minutes a day. But I'm warning you, I'm not easily impressed." Maria smiled, and it was the first real smile Richard had seen from her. "I'm not trying to impress you, Mr. Blackwood. I'm trying to reach you." "What's the difference?" "Impressing someone is about showing them what you can do. Reaching someone is about showing them what they can feel." Richard felt that uncomfortable flutter in his chest again, the same feeling he'd had when Maria first confronted him. "Whatever, just ... die something." "Not tonight," Maria said, covering the keys again. "Tonight you're still angry and defensive. Music doesn't work when you're fighting it. Tomorrow, when you come home, sit in that chair." She pointed to a comfortable armchair near the piano. "Don't bring your phone, don't bring your laptop, don't bring your work. Just come and sit. You're making rules now? I'm setting conditions? You want me to prove something that can't be proven with words or numbers or logic. You want me to show you something that requires you to feel, not think. That means you have to trust me enough to follow my guidance." Richard looked at her for a long moment. Trust wasn't something that came easily to him. In his world, trust was earned through contracts and collateral, not through faith in another person's promises, but he had made the challenge. And despite everything, he was curious. "Fine," he said again. "But this better be worth my time." "Time is the one thing you have plenty of, Mr. Blackwood. It's attention you're short on." Maria packed up her supplies and headed toward the door. Just before she left, she turned back to him. "One more thing. Music demands presence. When you sit in that chair tomorrow night, you can't be thinking about your business or your problems or your plans for the future. You have to be here, in this moment, with this music. Can you do that?" Richard wanted to say yes immediately, but something made him pause. When was the last time he had been fully present anywhere? When was the last time he had focused completely on one thing without part of his mind planning the next move? He couldn't remember. "I'll try," he said finally. "That's all anyone can do," Maria replied. "I'll see you tomorrow evening, Mr. Blackwood." "And Mr. Blackwood, thank you for giving me this chance." After she left, Richard stood alone in his apartment, looking at the piano. Tomorrow he would sit in that chair and listen to Maria play. He would try to be present, try to understand what she was talking about. He had no idea that he was about to discover something he'd been missing his entire adult life. He had no idea that the next 30 minutes would be the beginning of the end of the man he had become, and the beginning of the man he was meant to be. All he knew was that, for the first time in years, he was looking forward to coming home. Richard came home on Monday evening feeling like he was walking into some kind of experiment. All day at work, he had caught himself thinking about the piano, about Maria's challenge, about whether he was making a fool of himself. He had even left his phone in his bedroom, something he never did. Walking into his living room without it felt strange, like he was missing a part of his body. Maria was already there, sitting at the piano bench with her back straight and her hands resting on the keys. She had changed out of her cleaning clothes into a simple, dark dress that made her look more like a teacher than a housekeeper. "You came," she said, and Richard could hear surprise in her voice. "I said I would." Richard looked at the chair she had pointed out the night before. It was positioned at an angle where he could see both Maria and the piano, but far enough away that he wouldn't feel like he was intruding. "Your phone? In the bedroom? Your laptop? In my office?" Maria nodded approvingly. "Good, now sit and try to let go of everything that happened today. Try to let go of everything that might happen tomorrow. Right now there is only this room, this piano, and this music." Richard sat down, feeling awkward and unsure. "So what happens now? Do you just start playing?" "First, I want to tell you something about the piece I'm going to play. It's called Nocturne in E-flat major, written by a composer named Chopin. He wrote it for the piano, and it's meant to sound like nighttime, like the quiet, peaceful feeling you get when the world settles down and you can finally breathe." Richard shifted in his chair. "Okay." When Chopin was writing this, he was thinking about love. Not the dramatic, passionate kind of love you see in movies, the gentle, deep kind of love that makes you feel safe. The kind that wraps around you like a warm blanket on a cold night. Maria placed her hands on the keys. "I want you to close your eyes, Mr. Blackwood. Don't think about the notes or the technique or whether you like it or not. Just let the music exist and let yourself exist with it." Richard hesitated. Closing his eyes felt like giving up control. And control was something he never gave up. But he had made an agreement. He closed his eyes. The first notes floated through the room like whispers. Soft, gentle, careful. Richard found himself holding his breath, waiting for something dramatic to happen. But the music stayed quiet, patient, like it had all the time in the world. Slowly, Richard began to breathe normally. The melody seemed to flow like water, rising and falling, never rushing, never demanding attention. It simply existed, filling the space between them with something beautiful, without meaning to. Richard found himself remembering things he hadn't thought about in years. His mother, humming while she cooked dinner in their small kitchen, the sound of rain on the windows of his childhood bedroom, the feeling of being completely safe and loved. When the music ended, Richard realized his face was wet. He opened his eyes and quickly wiped away tears he hadn't even known he was crying. "What was that?" he asked, his voice rougher than usual. "That was Chopin," Maria said simply. "But more than that, it was you, remembering what it feels like to be human." Richard didn't know what to say to that. He stood up abruptly. "I'll see you tomorrow." The second evening, Maria played something completely different. She called it A Piece from Her Homeland, Guatemala. The melody was bright and playful, full of rhythms that made Richard want to tap his foot. "This is a song my grandmother taught me," Maria said before she began. "It's about the market day in our village. Listen, and you can hear the vendors calling out their wares, the children laughing, the church bells ringing in the distance." As she played, Richard could almost see what she was describing. The music painted pictures in his mind, showing him a world he had never experienced but somehow understood. He could hear the joy in it, the celebration of simple, everyday life. When she finished, Richard found himself smiling. Actually smiling, not the polite business smile he wore during meetings, but a real smile that came from somewhere deep inside. "How do you do that?" he asked. "Do what?" "Make me see things that aren't there. Make me feel things I haven't felt in years." Maria turned on the piano bench to face him. "The music doesn't make you feel anything, Mr. Blackwood. The feelings are already inside you. The music just reminds you they're there." On the third evening, Maria played something she had written herself. She called it Song for My Students. "I wrote this for the children I taught back home," she explained. "Some of them had very hard lives. Their families were poor, their futures uncertain. But when they came to my classroom and sat at the old piano, they forgot about their troubles. They became explorers, adventurers, dreamers. The melody started simply, like a child taking first steps. Then it grew more complex, more confident, like someone discovering they could fly. There were moments of sadness in it too, acknowledging the difficulties these children faced. But always the music returned to hope, to possibility, to joy. Halfway through the piece, Richard felt something break open inside his chest. It wasn't tears this time, though his eyes were wet. It was something bigger, deeper. Like a wall he had built around his heart was starting to crumble. He thought about the children Maria described. Children who had nothing but found everything in music. He thought about himself, a man who had everything but felt nothing most of the time. When the music ended, they sat in silence for a long moment. "Maria," Richard said finally, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Those children you taught, what happened to them when you left?" Maria's hands stilled on the keys. They found other teachers. Music finds a way to survive, even when individual teachers cannot stay. "But you miss them, every day," her voice was soft. "Teaching music to children was the most important thing I ever did. More important than any job I've had since." "Then why did you leave?" Maria was quiet for so long that Richard thought she wasn't going to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My husband died in an accident. The school couldn't afford to keep paying me without his income supporting us at home. I had to choose between staying where I belonged and coming here where I could survive." She looked at Richard with those clear eyes. "Sometimes life forces us to choose between our hearts and our stomachs." Richard felt something shift inside him. For the first time, he was seeing Maria not as his employee, not as someone whose job was to serve him, but as a real person with real dreams and real losses. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it. "That must have been incredibly difficult." "It was, but music taught me that endings are not always permanent. Sometimes they're just pauses before new beginnings." That night, after Maria left, Richard sat at the piano bench himself. He didn't play, he didn't know how, but he put his hands on the keys and felt their smooth coolness under his fingers. For the first time in years, Richard Blackwood felt less alone. On Thursday evening, Richard surprised himself by arriving home earlier than usual. He had been thinking about Maria's music all day, replaying the melodies in his head during meetings, humming quietly without even realizing it when he walked into his apartment. Maria was already at the piano, but she wasn't playing. She was just sitting there, her hands folded in her lap, looking thoughtful. "No music tonight?" Richard asked, settling into his chair. Maria turned to look at him. Actually, I was wondering something. Would you like to try playing? Richard felt his stomach drop. What? No, I don't know how to play piano. I'm not musical. How do you know you're not musical if you've never tried? I just know. Trust me, I'm better at numbers than notes. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Besides, I thought the deal was that you would play for me. The deal was that I would show you what music could do. Sometimes the best way. To understand music is to make it yourself, even badly. Especially badly in my case, Maria smiled. Mr. Blackwood, do you remember what I told you about my students? Some of them had never seen a piano before they came to my class. Some of them couldn't even read regular words, let alone music. But every single one of them could make music. Richard looked at the piano like it was a dangerous animal. I don't think so. I'll just embarrass myself. In front of who? Me? Maria stood up from the bench. I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to teach you, if you'll let me. What if I'm terrible at it? Then you'll be terrible at it. So what? Maria patted the piano bench. Come sit here. Richard didn't move. You don't understand? I don't do things I'm not good at. I haven't done anything I wasn't good at since I was a child. And how's that working out for you? The question hit Richard like a slap. He thought about his empty apartment, his lonely meals, his business relationships that felt more like transactions than connections. How was it working out for him? Slowly, reluctantly, Richard stood up and walked to the piano bench. Maria moved over to make room for him, and suddenly he was sitting in front of 88 keys that might as well have been written in a foreign language. I don't know what to do, he admitted. That's okay. Not knowing is the beginning of learning. Maria placed her hands on the keys. First, just feel the keys. They're not going to bite you. Richard tentatively placed his hands on the keyboard. The keys were smooth and cool, just like when he had touched them the night before. But now, with Maria sitting beside him, they felt different, less intimidating. Now, Maria said, forget everything you think you know about music. Forget about right and wrong, good and bad. Just press a key, any key. Richard pressed a white key in the middle of the piano. A clear, simple note rang out. Good, press another one. He pressed the key next to it. The sound was slightly higher. And another. Soon, Richard was pressing keys randomly, making sounds. That didn't sound like music at all. But something about it felt freeing, like being a child again. Exploring something new without worrying about being perfect. Now, Maria said after a few minutes, let me show you something simple. This is called a scale. It's like the alphabet of music. She placed her right hand on the keys and played 8 notes in a row. It sounded smooth and natural, like water. Flowing downhill, your turn. Richard tried to copy what she had done. His fingers were clumsy, hitting wrong keys, stumbling over themselves. The sounds that came out were nothing like Maria's graceful demonstration. This is ridiculous, Richard sighed, pulling his hands back. I sound like a drunk elephant. You sound like someone learning, Maria corrected. Do you remember the first time you tried to ride a bicycle? What does that have to do with anything? You fell down, didn't you? Probably scraped your knees. Maybe cried a little. Did you decide you were terrible at bicycle riding and never try again? Richard thought about it. No, I kept trying until I could do it. Why? Because ... Because I wanted to learn, because falling down was part of learning. Exactly. Maria placed her hands over his, guiding his fingers to the right keys. Making mistakes on the piano is just like falling off a bicycle. It's not failure, it's practice. With Maria's hands guiding his, Richard played the scale again. This time, it sounded almost musical, not perfect, but recognizable. See? You can do it. Richard tried again on his own. Better this time, though, still shaky. Then again. Each time, it got a little smoother, a little more confident. How long does it take to get good at this? Richard asked. Depends what you mean by good. To play. Simple melodies? A few weeks? To play like a professional? Years and years. But here's the secret. You don't have to be perfect to enjoy it. You don't have to be the best to find joy in it. Richard stopped playing and looked at Maria. I've spent my whole adult life trying to be the best at everything. I thought that was the point. Being the best at something can be wonderful, but it shouldn't be the only reason to do something. Sometimes we do things simply because they bring us pleasure or peace or connection with other people. Maria stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. When I was teaching children, I had students who would never be concert pianists. Their fingers were too slow, or they couldn't read music very well, or they just didn't have that special something that makes a professional musician. But some of those children loved music more than the talented ones. They played with their whole hearts, even if their technique was imperfect. She turned back to Richard. Which do you think brought them more happiness, being perfect or being present? Richard thought about his own life. All his success, all his achievements, all the things he was genuinely excellent at. When was the last time any of it had brought him real joy? Being present, he said quietly. Music teaches us that mistakes are not failures, Maria continued. They're just different paths to beauty. Every wrong note you play tonight is teaching your fingers something. Every stumble is building muscle memory. Every moment of frustration is followed by a moment of discovery. Richard looked down at his hands on the keys. Can you teach me a simple song? What would you like to learn? Richard thought for a moment. Something my mother used to sing to me when I was little. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, Maria smiled. Perfect. That's one of the first songs I taught all my students. It uses only 5 different notes, but it contains everything you need to know about melody. She showed him the notes one by one. C, C, G, G, A, G, then F, F, E, E, D, D. C. Richard played them slowly, carefully. His fingers awkward but determined it. Took 20 minutes, but finally something recognizable emerged from the piano. It wasn't beautiful, and it certainly wasn't smooth, but it was unmistakably Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. When he finished, Richard sat back and stared at his hands in amazement. I did that? You did that? It actually sounded like the song. It did. Richard felt something welling up inside him that he hadn't felt in decades. Pride, but not the cold competitive pride he was used to. This was warmer, simpler. The pride of a child who had just learned to tie his shoes or ride a bike. Can we do it again? He asked. Maria laughed, and it was the most beautiful sound Richard had heard all week. We can do it as many times as you want. As Richard played his simple song again, slower this time, but with more confidence, he realized something important was happening. For the first time in years, he was doing something purely for the joy of doing it. Not to win, not to prove anything, not to make money or impress anyone, just to feel his fingers on the keys, to hear the notes ring out in the silence of his apartment, to experience the strange magic of turning silence into sound. It was terrifying and wonderful at the same time. 2 weeks had passed since Richard first touched the piano keys, and something fundamental had shifted in his world. It started small, almost unnoticeable, like the first hint of spring after a long winter, on Monday morning, instead of rushing. Past his doorman with barely a nod, Richard stopped. Good morning, Thomas. How's your grandson doing? The one who was in the hospital? Thomas looked surprised. In 3 years of living in the building, Mr. Blackwood had never asked him a personal question. He's doing much better, sir. Thank you for asking. The doctors say he'll make a full recovery. And that's wonderful news. I'm glad to hear it. As Richard walked to his car, he realized he genuinely was glad. When had he started caring about other people's problems? When had he started seeing the people around him as actual human beings instead of just parts of the machinery that kept his life running smoothly? At the office, the changes were even more noticeable. During his morning meeting with his team, Richard found himself actually listening to what people were saying instead of just waiting for his turn to talk. His head of marketing, Jennifer, was explaining difficulties with a new campaign. In the past, Richard would have interrupted with solutions or criticism. Today he let her finish. It sounds like you're dealing with a lot of moving parts, Richard said when she was done. What kind of support do you need from me to make this work? Jennifer blinked in surprise. Well, if we could get approval for the additional budget we discussed last month and maybe extend the deadline by a week. Done. What else? The meeting continued in this new pattern. Richard asking questions instead of giving orders. Listening to problems instead of immediately jumping to solutions. Treating his employees like collaborators instead of subordinates. After the meeting, Jennifer lingered behind. Mr. Blackwood, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you feeling all right? You seem different lately. Richard smiled, and it was a real smile, not his usual business expression. I'm feeling better than I have in years, actually. Why do you ask? It's just, you're listening more. And you seem more I don't know, present? It's nice. The whole team has noticed. That evening, Richard came home eager to practice piano. Maria had been teaching him a new song, Amazing Grace, and he was determined to play it all the way through without stopping. But when he walked into his apartment, Maria was sitting in his chair instead of at the piano bench. She looked nervous, fidgeting with her cleaning supplies. Maria? Is everything all right? Mr. Blackwood, I need to tell you something, and I'm not sure how you're going to react. Richard felt his stomach tighten. What is it? I've been sending most of my salary to my sister back in Guatemala. Her husband left her with 3 children, and they've been struggling to survive. But last week she wrote to tell me that her youngest daughter, Sophia, has been diagnosed with a serious heart condition. Maria's voice was shaking now. The doctors say she needs surgery, but it costs more money than my sister will see in 5 years. I've been trying to figure out how to help, but even if I send her everything I make, it won't be enough. Richard sat down across from her. How much does the surgery cost? $25,000. Maria looked down at her hands. I know that's a lot of money, even for someone like you. I'm not asking you to pay for it. I would never presume to ask such a thing. I just I wanted you to know why I might seem distracted lately. I've been trying to find a way to help my family, and I don't know what to do. Richard was quiet for a long moment. A month ago, his first thought would have been about how this might affect Maria's work performance. His second thought would have been about whether this was some kind of scam to get money from him, but now, all he could think about was a little girl he'd never met who needed help. A child who was part of Maria's family, and Maria had become, what? Not just his employee anymore? Something more than that? Maria, Richard said finally, $25,000 isn't a lot of money to me. It's less than I spent on that piano. Maria looked up sharply. Mr. Blackwood, I wasn't asking. I know you weren't asking. But I'm offering, Richard leaned forward. You've given me something in these past few weeks that I didn't even know I was missing. You've reminded me what it feels like to be human. The least I can do is help your niece get the surgery she needs. Tears started flowing down Maria's cheeks. I can't accept that. It's too much. It's not nearly enough. Richard stood up and walked to his desk, pulling out his checkbook. What's your sister's name? Elena Santos Rodriguez. Richard wrote out the check, then walked back and handed it to Maria. She stared at it like it was written in a foreign language. This isn't charity, Richard said gently. This is family helping family. Family? You've become important to me, Maria, more important than I knew how to express. If Sophia is your family, then she's my responsibility too. Maria was crying. Harder now, but she was also smiling. You don't know what this means. You don't know what you've just done? I know exactly what I've done. I've helped save a little girl's life. That's the most important thing I've done with my money in years. That night, they didn't practice piano. Instead, they sat and talked. Maria told Richard stories about her sister's children, about the small village where they lived, about the dreams she had for their futures. Richard found himself genuinely interested in the lives of people he would never meet. People who lived thousands of miles away in a world completely different from his own. The next morning, Richard arrived at work with a new energy. He called his assistant into his office. Johnson, I want you to look into something for me. Research the process for getting teaching credentials recognized in New York, specifically for someone who was a certified music teacher in Guatemala. Is this for someone in particular? Yes, and I want you to find out what it would cost to start a music program for underprivileged children. Real costs, not estimates. I want to know about instruments, classroom space, teacher salaries, everything. Are you thinking about starting a foundation? Richard paused. Was he? A month ago, the idea would have seemed ridiculous. But now, maybe, just get me the information. Over the next few days, Richard found himself approaching everything differently. In business meetings, he listened for the human stories behind the numbers. When negotiating deals, he looked for solutions that benefited everyone, not just his own company. When talking to his employees, he asked about their lives, their families, their dreams. The strangest part was how much better he felt. For years, Richard had operated like a machine, efficient and emotionless. He had thought that caring about people would make him weak, would distract him from his goals. Instead, he discovered that caring about people made him stronger. When his employees felt valued and heard, they worked harder and more creatively. When his business partners trusted him to consider their interests, they were more willing to make deals. When he approached problems with empathy instead of just logic, he found solutions he never would have seen before. On Friday evening, Richard came home to find Maria at the piano, but she wasn't playing their usual lesson music. She was playing something joyful and celebratory, her fingers dancing across the keys with pure happiness. "Good news?" Richard asked, settling into his chair. Maria turned to him with the biggest smile he'd ever seen on her face. "Sophia had her surgery yesterday. The doctors say it was completely successful. She's going to be fine." "That's wonderful." "Richard," Maria said, and it was the first time she had ever used his first name. "I will never be able to thank you enough for what you've done." "You already have," Richard replied. "You gave me my life back. Helping Sophia was the least I could do." As Maria began to play again, Richard closed his eyes and listened. But this time, he wasn't just hearing the music. He was feeling it, understanding it, becoming part of it. For the first time in 20 years, Richard Blackwood felt truly alive. 3 months had passed since Richard's first piano lesson, and the world looked completely different to him now. Not because anything around him had changed, but because he had changed the way he saw everything. He woke up one Saturday morning in November and realized something remarkable. For the first time in years, he was genuinely excited about the day ahead. Not because of a business deal or a financial opportunity, but because he had something special planned. Today was Maria's birthday. Richard had learned this fact the week before, quite by accident. Maria had been on the phone with her sister, speaking in rapid Spanish, and he had heard her mention the date. When he asked her about it later, she had seemed embarrassed. "It's not important, Mr. Blackwood, just another year older." But it was important to Richard. More important than she could possibly know. He had been planning this surprise for weeks, working with his assistant and a team of lawyers to make everything perfect. Today, he would give Maria something that no amount of money could truly buy, but that his money could make possible. Maria arrived that morning as she always did, with her cleaning supplies and her quiet smile. She had no idea that Richard had arranged to have the day off from work, or that he had been awake since dawn making final preparations. "Good morning, Maria. Happy birthday." She looked surprised. "You remembered?" "Of course I remembered." "How could I forget the birthday of the person who gave me my life back?" Maria set down her supplies, looking confused. "You don't have to make a big deal about it. I'm just here to clean and maybe give you a piano lesson later." "Actually," Richard said, his heart beating faster than it did during major business presentations, "I have something to show you. Something I've been working on." He led her to his office, where he had spread out papers across his desk. Legal documents, architectural plans, photographs, and official letters with impressive letterheads. "What is all this?" Maria asked. Richard took a deep breath. "Maria, do you remember telling me about your teaching credentials from Guatemala? How they weren't recognized here in New York?" "Yes. Well, they are now." He handed her an official document. "Your teaching certificate has been validated by the New York Department of Education. You are officially qualified to teach music in any school in this state." Maria stared at the paper, her hands shaking slightly. "I don't understand. How is this possible?" It's possible because it should have been done a long time ago. You're an excellent teacher, Maria. Your students back home prove that, and now you can have students here too. Richard picked up another set of documents, but that's not all. I've been working with the city to establish a new program. It's called the Community Music Initiative, and it's designed to bring music education to children who otherwise wouldn't have access to it. He spread out architectural plans showing a beautiful space with multiple rooms, each equipped with different instruments. This is going to be our music center, located in a neighborhood where most families can't afford private music lessons. The program will be completely free for any child who wants to participate. Maria was staring at the plans with tears in her eyes. Our music center? I want you to run it, Maria. I want you to be the director of this program. You'll hire other teachers, design the curriculum, and do what you were born to do. Teach children to love music. Maria sat down heavily. In the chair across from his desk, Richard, this is incredible. But I can't possibly accept something like this. It's too much. It's not too much. It's exactly right. Richard came around the desk and knelt beside her chair. Maria, 3 months ago, I was a man who had everything and felt nothing. I was successful, wealthy, and completely empty inside. I had convinced myself that happiness could be bought, that people were just transactions, that music was just noise. He gestured toward the piano in the living room, visible through the office doorway. You changed all of that. You showed me that the most valuable things in life can't be purchased. You taught me that joy comes from connection, from creativity, from giving something beautiful to the world. Maria was crying now, but she was also smiling. You did that yourself. I just played some music. You did so much more than that. You reminded me who I used to be before I forgot how to feel. You helped me remember that success without heart is just emptiness wearing expensive clothes. Richard stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city where somewhere children were growing up without access to the kind of beauty that music could bring to their lives. This music center isn't charity, Maria. It's the smartest investment I've ever made. I'm investing in joy, in creativity, in the future of children who deserve to discover what you helped me discover. He turned back to her. Besides, I'm being completely selfish here. I want to see you do what you love again. I want to watch you light up the way you do when you talk about teaching. I want to be part of something that matters. Maria wiped her eyes and looked at the plans again. How many children could we serve? The center could accommodate about 200 students at a time. Piano, guitar, violin, singing, even composition classes. We could offer after-school programs, weekend workshops, summer camps, whatever these kids need. And you really want me to run it? I can't think of anyone better qualified. You have the teaching experience, the musical knowledge, and most importantly, the heart for it. You understand that music isn't just about playing notes correctly, it's about helping people find their voices. Maria stood up and walked around the desk, looking at all the documents, the plans, the photographs of potential locations. When could we start? Richard smiled. The building will be ready in 6 months, but we could start interviewing other teachers right away. We could begin planning the curriculum, designing the programs, reaching out to schools and community centers to find our first students. Our first students, Maria repeated softly. I haven't had students in 5 years. Well, that's not entirely true, Richard said. You've had 1 student for the past 3 months. A very slow learner who struggled with simple scales and got frustrated when he couldn't play perfectly on the first try. Maria laughed, the sound filling the office with warmth. That student has made remarkable progress, actually. Last week, he played Amazing Grace all the way through without a single mistake, only because he had an excellent teacher. They spent the rest of the morning going over the plans, discussing possibilities, dreaming about the children who would benefit from this program. Richard had never felt more energized, more purposeful, more alive. That evening, they held their first joint performance. Richard had been practicing a simple arrangement of Amazing Grace, while Maria had written a beautiful harmony to accompany it. They had planned to perform it just for themselves in the privacy of Richard's apartment, But as word of the new music center had spread throughout the building, neighbors had asked if they could listen. Soon, the living room was filled with people, the doorman Thomas and his wife, several residents from other floors, even Richard's assistant and her family. As Richard's fingers found the familiar melody on the piano keys, he felt a calmness he had never experienced before. The notes flowed naturally now, no longer the clumsy sounds of a beginner, but the confident expression of someone who had found joy in the process of learning. Maria's harmony wove around his melody like silk, supporting it, enhancing it, making it more beautiful than either part could be alone. As they played together, Richard looked out at their small audience and saw faces filled with peace, with appreciation, with the same wonder he had felt when Maria first played for him. When the music ended, the room erupted in applause, but the sound Richard heard most clearly was something he had been missing for decades, the sound of his own laughter. Genuine and joyful and completely free. Later, after everyone had gone home and Maria had left for the evening, Richard sat alone at the piano. He played Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, the first song Maria had taught him, and remembered how impossible it had seemed just 3 months ago. Now it felt as natural as breathing. The millionaire who had once mocked the idea of finding joy in music had discovered something worth more than all his wealth combined. He had found his way back to himself, and in doing so, he had found a way to give that same gift to others. The laughter that had seemed so impossible, so purchasable, so false, now came as easily as the music from his fingers. And both the laughter and the music were real, honest, and absolutely free.